Hi, how's everybody doing? In this blog update, I'm going to talk about massive, out of control immigration from Africa and Islamic countries into Europe. Alright, I'm going to talk about this. I was just reading an article, I'm going to show it to you in just a minute, where they're now talking about over the next, I think it's 20 or 30 years, there might be 150 to 200 million predominantly African and Islamic immigrants pouring into Europe. Alright, Europe will not survive if that happens. Alright. I mean, the honest truth is it won't be 200 million, because if it's 200 million, they would have 200 to 400 to 600 million children. Europe would be dead before that happens. All right, Europe will not survive that. We've seen what's happened with what, 5 or 10 million? Immigrants from Africa that poured into Europe, and we've seen all the problems that's created. We've seen all the problems that's created. Can you imagine if that number was 200 million plus all their children, which is another 400, 600 million? Europe will not survive. So actually, although this article is incredibly depressing, the thing is it will never reach those numbers because Europe will be dead before those numbers are ever actually realized. All right, so I'm going to give you the article right now. And what I mean by dead is the economy will totally collapse and it will become just as poor as Africa, and then people from Africa won't go there because it'll be just as poor as Africa with snow and cold. So they won't even bother going. Because obviously if it's going to be just as poor as Africa with snow and cold, then the people would just stay in Africa because there's no snow and cold. So let me just show you the article real quick. Alright, so this is from Breitbart. Sorry it takes so long. Oh, I hate this camera. It just focuses and it disfocuses. Alright, so here's the article from Breitbart. This is the French leader, Macron. They should have elected Marine Le Pen. They should have voted for Marine Le Pen. But instead they voted for this guy. And he said, Europe entering age of unprecedented mass migration shares destiny with Africa. And you just read the article, it's incredibly depressing. And it says, the African expert to whom Macron, the French leader, referred during his appearance on BFM TV, estimates that the number of Africans living in Europe will grow from 9 million, that's what it currently is, to between 150 and 200 million within the next 30 years. And then I guess their children will be even more than that. You know, well, I'm not sure exactly what they mean, but that will never happen. It'll never happen because Europe will be financially collapsed way before that ever happens. So you've seen what's happening in London, how their violent crime is skyrocketing. So you've seen what's happened in London with their violent crime skyrocketing. The murder rate is skyrocketing. Stabbings are happening now every night in London. London used to be an extremely safe city. They brought in thousands and thousands of immigrants, predominantly from Islamic and African countries, migrants, and now their crime rate is just going through the roof. Same thing's happening in Sweden. The same thing's happening in a lot of these Western European countries that have just brought in way too many people, way too fast. So if we've seen 9 million create all those problems, and then you add in the terrorist attacks as well, can you imagine what 200 million would do? It will never happen. It will never happen because Europe will totally implode. It will totally collapse. The economy will totally collapse. The welfare state will totally collapse. The unemployment rate will be 40%. The place will just collapse so much that the immigrants will just stop coming. They'll just stop coming because it will no longer be a good place to go. That's what will happen. You know, eventually, it's kind of like you have water here that's, say, green, and then you have water here that's, say, red, and then you're pouring one in. Well, actually, that's a bad analogy. I'm trying to think of a better analogy. I can't really think of a better analogy, but basically, as more and more people go into Europe, the wages go lower and lower. As more and more people go into Europe, the crime rate goes higher and higher. Eventually, it's no longer an advantage to go there because it will collapse so much that it will be on par with the African countries. All right, they'll both be dirt poor, and they'll both be horrible places to live, high crime infested places. And when that happens, the people from Africa won't go to Europe because there's no advantage. There's no advantage, so they just won't go. So then the numbers will stop. And the same thing will happen to America with our illegals. You know, eventually the wages in America will go down so low, Mexico wages will be here, South America wages will be here, America's wages will be almost there. And when you do all the, you know, currency conversions and cost of living conversions, it won't be any advantage to come to America. You know, you'd be better off just being a person in Latin America, just working construction, making $3 an hour, and having a small little cinder block house. Because if you go to America, you'll make $12 an hour and you'll live in a little micro studio. You know, it'll get so bad in America, basically, that the immigrants will stop coming because it's no longer beneficial. All right, that's basically what will happen. But here's the thing for us, Americans, and for the Europeans. Do you want to have mass immigration until the point your country gets so poor that then the immigrants stop coming because your country's so poor? I mean, that's disastrous for us. That's totally disastrous for us, and that's why the mass immigration's got to stop, because that's what it's going to lead to. You know, eventually, yeah, the immigrants will stop coming because we're going to be so dirt poor, we're going to be so crime infested, they won't want to come here no more because there will be no advantage to them. There won't be no advantage to them to come, so then they'll stop coming. But that's just a recipe for one giant third world planet. And, you know, like I said, you know, a lot of the immigrants that come in are good. That's true. But when you use hundreds and 200 million immigrants to come in all at once, it then collapses the country. So even if they're 90% good people, it still collapses the country economically. It still collapses everything. It still makes the apartment rent sky high, makes the wages ultra low, and collapses the economy and makes us third world. All right, it still wrecks the country, even if they are mostly all good people. You know, it's better to build schools, build hospitals in these third world countries, give birth control in the third world countries. It's much better to do those things. Those things are much, much better than to just say, okay, come to the West, and then eventually we'll all be third world dirt poor together. That's the worst thing to do. And in Europe, it's much, much worse, because in Europe they have an even bigger welfare state than America. It's predominantly Islamic immigration into Europe. A lot of them are on welfare. There's like 40% unemployment rates in a lot of these, you know, immigrant Islamic neighborhoods in Europe. There's like 40% unemployment rates. You know, it's just a recipe for economic disaster. So the more you bring in, the more the economy is going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. Unemployment is sky high. The wages go lower and lower and lower. The rents go higher and higher. It creates massive housing crisis, making house prices astronomical. The rich elites love it, and the middle class get totally screwed. And the young people, they can't buy houses. The young people, they can't start their life together. They can't get married. They can't get an apartment because the rents are sky high. It's a recipe for just total disaster. You know, the mass immigration's got to stop. We got to lower immigration in Europe, lower immigration in America, Canada, Australia. The immigration's got to be way lowered. Otherwise, we are just going to totally be gigantic third world, where everybody will be third world together in dirt poor poverty, while the rich socialist elites have billions and billions and billions of dollars. While the rich socialist elites, the techie bureaucratic elites at the top have all the money. That's basically their system.